And hello, everybody. Welcome back for another episode, If Not Now Wen. In today's show, we are so excited to welcome our next guest join us today. We have Brian Beck on the show with us. Brian, he is a managing partner and co-founder of Sabio Tech Partners, an Austin-based technology advisory firm that focusing on helping middle-market private equity firms achieving a greater investment evaluation with a reduced risk. Sabio has developed an innovative approach and toolset is called Quality of Technologies, specifically designed to enable private equity firms to conduct a robust and rapid technology due diligence of their potential acquisitions. In his spare time, Brian enjoys travel around the world. He also loves Austin food scenes and grill in his backyard. With that, everybody, I am so excited. Please join me to welcome Brian to the show, and thank you so much, Brian. So, Brian, welcome. Tell us how is all the magic began for you?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the 70s when computers were like a kind of a new thing. And it was something I was very fascinated about. So my dad worked for IBM. So he had access to some of the early PCs and he would bring one home, and I'm like, wow, what is this? So I was like, I just got crazy about it. And so it became a fascination for me when it was not something that most people didn't even know about at the time. It was something new.
Why? What fascinated about it?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a good question. I just thought it was very cool. It's just something really cool. It's something new, and that'll be something that's always a theme through my entire life as I look back on it. But it was new. It was different. It was something I'd never seen before. I'm like, I want to learn this thing. So that's what I did. And so, you're going through high school, you're going through your thing, and it's like, okay, this is great, this is fun, but it wasn't anything I ever thought about doing as a job or a career. But I went to I went to Tulane University in New Orleans, which was far away from where I grew up, which was in Connecticut, and I did that very intentionally. I wanted to get out of the small town I was in. And I think you have a very similar thought process. I wanted to get out of that small town. I wanted to go to a big city. And it was like, I just wanted to be far away from home. I wanted something completely different from what I had. And I didn't really know it at the time, but I mean, like that's a recurring theme through my life is just, I like to do stuff and get into things that I've never done before. And so, going to New Orleans was a really different experience. It was
How so?
very cool. It's nothing like I'd ever seen before. I mean, like I said, I grew up in a small town, and everybody kind of knew everybody, and there was one high school. You were all in one place, and I wanted to go to a place that I'd never been, and it was far away from where I was. I didn't want to be able to go back home when I was in school. I wanted to force myself into that situation and
Why?
Yeah,
Take courage.
it's a good question. It took me a long time to realize that about myself. It was just like, I like different experiences. I like going into something that I have never been in before. I'm very experiential, I guess is what they call it today, right? It's I don't like the norm. I just like getting outside the box. I like putting myself into uncomfortable situations. Like I said, it took me a while to realize that that's what I was about. But I'm like, why did I do that? So that's and I'd later asked myself that question, and I realized, after a while, that's why I did it. But I went to Tulane to study chemical engineering. That was my intent when I went there. I was always interested in science and chemistry and math and all that kind of stuff. And I got there, and like 3 days after I got there, I'm like, you can major in computer science. I mean, like, this was 1983. And I'm like, I didn't even know you could major in that. So I was like, I called my mom, and I was like, I'm doing computer science. She's like, wait, what? And I was like, I didn't know you could do this. I'm doing this. And so I didn't have any intent when I went to Tulane to do computer science, but that's what I majored in. And I was like, this is so cool. I mean, like this thing I was doing as a kid, which was fun to me. I'm like, you can actually do this. You can study this. You can do this as a job. And I was like, awesome. So that's what I did.
You have so much curiosity in your eyes. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was fun. I mean, like I said, I had no idea that you could do that, and I was really happy to discover that. And, maybe it's just luck. I don't know. I mean, I could have gone to a school that didn't have a computer science department, and they did, and I was like, I'm doing that.
That's wonderful. So what's next?
Yeah, so I did that, and it was a lot of fun, and I mean, I loved school. I loved being at school. It was
Me too.
it was a great time. I mean, probably one of the best times of my life, and I met a lot of great people, a lot of friends, and but by the time I got to my senior year, I was like, I'm ready to get out. I'm ready to be done with school. I want to go do something. I want to go use what I know now to do something, and it was so I looked around. I had a number of opportunities, and I wound up in San Francisco, the San Francisco Bay Area, and I worked for a bank doing doing computer science. And why I picked that, not real. There's probably a number of different reasons, but my father lived in the Bay Area at the time. My parents had divorced, so he lived there, and I'm like, well, that's helpful. And but San Francisco, I'm like, I never really been there. I'm like, this is again, it's the same kind of theme. I was like, this sounds cool, so I did that. So I went out to the Bay Area and worked for the bank for 5-something years, and got a little tired of that. And so and that's when I started to realize about myself that I kind of get bored easily. I really, really need to like have new stuff coming in, new stuff, doing new things. And so I took a job with, at the time, it was KPMG, which is one of the big four accounting firms. But that's when they had, they all did consulting. And so they hired me to do in the consulting area. And I'm like, consulting sounds interesting because, it's something that it's always different. You're always on different stuff. And so did that. And I'm like, and that was from like 1992 to 97, and when I eventually left there. But those 5 years, I think I learned more in those 5 years than my entire life, and I loved it. I mean, it was just everything was different, and you learn. I recognized in myself, like, I really like taking on stuff that I don't know. I mean, it's like, let me get into that. Let me learn that. Let me learn this. And so I did that for quite 5 years.
And why leave if you love it so much?
Yeah, I mean, so I came in as an entry-level consultant in 1992, and it was so this was in 96. They were like, wanted to make me a partner. So I mean, that's like 5 levels up in 5 years, and I was like, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I did not want to be a partner in the firm because once you have to buy in, they kind of put the chains on you, and I'm like, you're kind of making a long-term commitment, and I did not want to do that. I just wanted to do something different. Now, you think about the mid-90s in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley. This was the heart of the internet era, and all that was getting going. And I'm like, no, I'm going to go do something else.
That's a big and brave decision. You walk away from a very lucrative and amazing offer, decided to do something else that you probably yet have an idea about, right?
Yeah, I didn't really. No, it's a good point. I mean, a lot of people ask me that question. I'm like, why are you walking away from that? I mean, that's a great opportunity. I'm like, yeah, I know that. I'm like, but I believe in myself, and I'm gonna go find something else.
Do you always believe in yourself, Brian?
No, I didn't.
When did you find that?
Oh man, I mean, when I was younger, I was very shy and very not confident in myself. And I look back at my younger self, and I'm like, look at now, and I'm like, I can't believe that's the same person.
What changed?
Yeah, it's I was very shy. I mean, I couldn't even talk to people. I was like, I get into a room with a group of people, and I would be the one in the corner, back on the back wall, because I just was not as confident in myself as I probably should have been, and so that job helped me do that. And I remember, I was a senior consultant, and I had a senior manager at the time, and he sat me down and he told me, you really need to be more outgoing. You need to speak your opinions. You are a very smart person. You know a lot of things. You need to talk more. Because I wouldn't. I would just get back and I wouldn't say anything. And when you're a consultant, it's like at some point they're paying you for what you know and what you think and what you do, right? And so I'm like, that was some of the best advice I ever got. It was like, you really need to like start putting yourself out there. And I had never done that before. And don't ask, why, I don't know. But he was right. He was absolutely right. I'm like, you're absolutely right. And so that started to get me down that path of, well, how do you do that? And, you got to feel confident in what you're saying, and you got to essentially believe in yourself. And I'm like, well, I do, but why do I feel uncomfortable doing that? And you just do it. You just got to do it. You got to put yourself out, and you live and learn. And it was challenging for me at the time, but eventually I figured it out.
What do you figure it out? Just do it.
Yeah, I used to write. I used to journal, and write thoughts down just every like everybody does this like in January, like your New Year's resolutions or whatever it is. And so I would write a mantra to myself each year, and
Oh, I love that.
and one of them was, my main one, which lasted for 3 years, was no fear. Because that's what it is. It was fear. I was afraid of something, and I don't like that. I don't like being afraid, and it took me a while to recognize that. But at the end of the day, I was like, what are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? I'm like, go do it. And so I would write no fear. That was, and the other one was just do it. It was like borrowing Nike's mantra. I was like, just do it. Just do it. And
so do you looking at it every day, or what is your practice? Make sure that ingrained in you throughout the year.
Yeah, I would go back and I'd look at that. I'd go back and read what I wrote, for, every, I don't know, maybe a couple of months or so. And I'd be like, you look at what you write, and I'm like, what was I thinking? Why was I thinking that? And so, you just learn. You learn from what you write down, and I learned a lot from what I would write myself. And that was never intended for anybody else. It was just intended for me. But it helps. I've always found that it helps me to write, like what I think, and it's, you can't. It's right at that moment. It's what you're thinking. It was like just stream of consciousness.
Do you do it every day, in the morning, in the evening?
No, it wasn't. It was not a regular schedule. It was just when I felt like doing it, and I would just try to do it at least once a week at that time. And
I love how intentional you are. That's wonderful.
Yeah, well, it took practice to get there. Like I didn't have any intention of doing that, but you read some of I read a lot. I like to, you learn a lot from others, and you talk to people, or at least I read a lot of books. And so a lot of self-help stuff and things like, that's a good idea. I think that makes sense, writing stuff down. Because, when you write stuff down, you have to think about it, and you have to translate it into something that makes sense. Like, if at least I want to read it again later. So it makes you think about it, and that was the intent. Yeah.
I love that. So now, without fear, now just doing it. Tell us about Silicon Valley.
Yeah, it's when I went there, it was 1987 when I went up in the San Francisco Bay Area. No one knew what was coming, right? And I just remember distinctly in 1995 when the Netscape browser came out on the internet, and I'm like, wow, what is this? I remember like a lot of my friends and colleagues, everybody got onto that browser, and I'm like, this is insane. This is incredible. Like, just to be able to go like find all this information out there. And I didn't know at the time. I just remember thinking, this is going to change everything. This is going to change everything. If I knew, I'd be a billionaire right now. But I just knew that this is a cool place. So I had never intended to stay in San Francisco that long. Um, I was there for 13 years. I eventually left in 1999. We can talk about that. But I never intended to stay that long. It was just kind of like, okay, I got a job. This is great. And I'll figure out what I really want to do, because I didn't really want to work for a bank.
So did you work for a startup to
No,
begin
not at
off?
that time. No, I said I worked for Bank of America,
Mm-hmm.
and then I went to KPMG.
Right. But what happened afterwards?
Yeah, so I eventually got, I said they wanted me to make me a partner, and I didn't want to do that. And one of the main reasons was, once you get to that level, you don't actually get to do the work. You just kind of oversee it. And I didn't really want to do that at the time. Plus, I didn't want to buy in and make that commitment. So I left. I had a bunch of friends. I went to PeopleSoft, for folks that remember that. That was a pretty big deal at the time. It was just getting to the point where it was becoming a big company, and I wanted, it was just something different. It was something interesting. So I was like tasked with kind of managing or growing their professional services department, which is essentially consulting for a software company, and and growing that. But I learned so much about that because I learned a lot in that process, because it was like, how do you make something from like 100 people to like 1,000 people,
How?
which is what we did in a matter of like 3 years.
How did you do that?
Yeah, it was an extreme challenge, because you realize that it's easy to go bring people into the company, at that time for sure, but how do you support all those people? What are all the systems and the processes and the things behind the scenes that you need to have to make that work well? And that was my job, and it was great. It was a lot of fun, because I mean, like, I love challenges. I love figuring stuff out. Like, what do we need to be, and where are we now, and how are we going to bridge that gap? And that's, I look back on my career, and I'm like, all of these things set me up for what I'm doing now, and and I feel very fortunate that I had the opportunities that I did. But yeah, it was an extreme challenge. I mean, it's difficult.
But you love it. You go for it,
I do.
which
Yeah.
is brilliant part about you.
Yeah, it's, I mean, give me a challenge. That's what I want, and at one point before I left KPMG, I was like, what are the projects that are going south? Give me a project that's failing. I'll go fix it. And so, one of the big things I realized about myself is I like solving problems.
I'm going to say you are the problem
I
solver
like
in your
solving
heart.
problems. Yeah, and that is what I like. That I like investigating things, like what is going on here, and that's when I started to realize that about myself. So I say, okay, PeopleSoft kind of started to go south, and I said, this is the internet era. I'm going to go do something else, and that's when I finally joined a startup.
Tell us about that.
In 1999. Yeah, it was one of the, what do they call them? What do we call ourselves? It was like a e-consultancy, or everything was e at that time, right? I mean, e-commerce. It was it was a consultancy that focused on the internet. And
Was it a scary move from a big company to a relatively smaller size? And
no, it really
no,
wasn't. I mean, I knew some folks over there, and it was. I like doing consulting, because, as I said, I learned so much in that 5 years I was at KPMG, because you get put into situations that you may not be an expert in, but you know something about, and you got to learn it, and you got to figure it out. And so that I like that. I like that. That situation. And so this was a similar thing, but it was in this new thing, the internet, right? Which was at the time, something that not everybody knew about. So
did
yeah,
you enjoy it?
yeah, I really liked it. I mean, I was in San Francisco, and I was, I actually was thinking about leaving San Francisco just because it was so crazy at the time. But I joined them in San Francisco, and they asked me to move to Dallas, and I was like, sure, start an office. Yeah, I'm down with that. I'm like, that's something new. Never done that before. So I moved to Dallas and started that office. And then, that was in 1999. 1 year later, they were like, we're looking to start international, and we're going to start an office in London. And if you want to do that, put your name in. And so I did, and they picked me. So I was like, so I went to London.
How's that experience?
It was fantastic. I mean, one of the things, when I went, I don't know when it was, but somewhere in the 90s, I was like, I really want to travel. I really want to go to other places, like not just San Francisco. I want to travel. And if I could do it on a business on someone else's dime, then that's even better. So so that was perfect. I was like, I always did want to live outside the United States or spend some time outside the U.S. just for perspective. And I think you can't possibly know what it's like anywhere else until you're there. And I mean, I'm sure you have a lot of stories about that. And so I lived in London. When I was people thought I was traveling to Sydney. I went to Australia, Singapore, Tokyo, and all these places. I'm like, this is great. I mean, like I really like seeing other cultures, just something different.
Why do you enjoy that?
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's just it's hard to explain, but it's like I just want to see other things. Like you can get so locked into what you have, where you are, and what you know. It's like, no, I like different experiences. I want to see how other places in the world are. I want to see other things. And
I definitely see where you're coming from. For me, I feel like when we travel, it humbles me. It made me see different culture, different life, different perspective. Made me realize maybe things I was worried about, it's nothing. And the best part is the more I travel, the more I realize how different we are, but how the exact same we are. We all, just think about dumplings, okay? Asian have dumplings. Everyone else also have dumplings, right? We have pierogi, people have empanada, it's the exact same thing. And not only from food, but I think essentially, all the differences aside, we are all exactly the same, on the same journey, finding our own happiness, our own joys. And
very much
the more travel I realized how small the world become. And that really humbles me as who I am and what I'm about.
Yeah, I mean, you have a great story. I mean, I love your story. I mean, and that's, I think in our country, in the U.S., so many people don't travel outside this country, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But I mean, like, we're kind of isolated in this part of the world. I mean, like when you're in Europe, I was in Germany, I was whatever, So I was like, they just don't have that experience. And whenever I would leave the United States, and when I lived in London, I eventually went to Germany, in Munich, for several months as well, as part of that job. It made me realize, like, I completely appreciated what we have in the United States so much more. I was like, you don't, and I was told that, like, if you're gonna go be an expat somewhere, here's how it's gonna go. It's gonna feel like a vacation for the first month or two, and then you're gonna realize, okay, it's very different here, and it's not. You're gonna miss things, and that's exactly what happened. It's exactly what happened. I mean, like, you don't realize, like, the stuff that you do, or the stuff, like, I'm a big sports fan, and so I would watch, football and all these things. I'm like, you couldn't do that in 2000. I couldn't do that. There was no way to do that, and so I had to, like, okay, like, well, I really like sports, so I'm gonna learn soccer, because I never, soccer wasn't that big in this country at that time. So I learned that, and I'm like, okay, but I'm like, I realized, I'm like, there's a lot of things that I just do miss about the U.S. I'm like, I'm not trying to sound arrogant, but I was like, I think this is a great country, and we have our issues, no question. But I was like, it's a great country, and I loved it that much more once I left and came back. So it was,
That's beautiful.
Gives you perspective, and I like that's like, I think that word. I say that to my wife all the time. Like, what I really like about what I've done in my life is, like, I've got a lot of perspective from other views. And I would have people telling me like what they thought of the United States, being outside the United States. And I saw it. I'm like, I get it. I totally get it. I see what you're saying. It's like when you're not there, I mean, like you can think all these things because, what it is. But I was like, it was very, I felt very fortunate to be able to do that because not everybody gets to do that.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So what's next? Now you journey to London, Germany, all around the world. Then what's next for you?
Yeah, so then I started to do the startup. So the company was called Scient. They kind of cratered when the dot-com meltdown happened. I started to do a number of different startups, and none of those worked out. But it was a good experience. I mean, like I liked the challenge of those opportunities.
Was it difficult when you realized it not worked out? Because you are a problem solver at heart and you want to make it work.
Yeah.
Was it difficult to walk away from those moments?
Yeah, it stunk. I mean, you want to make it work. You want to be successful. But, I've always believed you don't really learn a lot from success. You learn from failure.
So what do you learn the most from the failure?
Yeah.
From that experience?
Yeah. I mean, I'm always game for taking on a new opportunity or a new challenge. And it really told me a lot about the people that run the company. It matters. The people, I think companies are successful because of people, not because of anything else at the end of the day. I mean,
I agree.
Yeah. Who leading it, what they believe, what they know. I mean, that matters. And so that's kind of what I learned is that people are really at the end of the day. I mean, that sounds, obvious, but I mean, like, why do some companies succeed and why do others fail? I mean, and that's what you start thinking about, and that's what I started thinking about, and it's, it's like it's who's driving it. I mean, like who's running it? I mean, like, do they get it? For lack of a better term. And so, that's what I learned out of it, and so I did a bunch of those. And
would you doubt about yourself at that moment, given that you have a lot of quote unquote not success venture at that moment?
Did I doubt myself?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, well, maybe I'm not what I think I am. I mean, yeah, I did have those thoughts, no question. I mean, how could you not? I mean, it's, when you go through a couple of failures and it's like, well, what's going on here? I mean, like, what am I doing?
Because I'm asking that a lot of listeners, a lot of founders today are probably not on a smooth path neither. And there's moments that we feel like, wow, there's one sign after another. What's going on? Is it me or
Right.
So I'm curious, Brian, how do you move through that? What inspired you to keep going?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You're right. It's there's no question. You have to start looking at yourself when in those situations. You have to, because it's like, is it me or is there something else? And, as I said a while back, I mean, it's like, at the end of the day, I did believe in what I did. I believed in myself. And I'm like, okay, I don't think it's me. Maybe I'm just making the wrong choices. Maybe I'm just connecting with the wrong people or what have you. And so I did doubt myself, but I'm like I said, I just, at the end of the day, it was like, I do believe in what I can do. I do believe in myself and keep going. I mean, there's nothing else you can do. So, I mean, it was challenging for sure. There was no question it was challenging, but I was like, I always believed that I would get where I wanted to go.
What do you wanted to go at the time? Was it just solving different problems? What do you want to go?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think I could have answered that for much of my life. I mean, I didn't know. I mean, I didn't even really know what I liked for a long time, but then I figured it out, like right around that time was like, okay, I like solving problems. I like making impact. I like, being able to, provide a skill or advice that matters to somewhere. And so then I got back into consulting. And so, I was like, that's kind of where I learned a lot, and I made, you can make a difference doing that. It's a challenging business to be sure, but, because you're on the road all the time, or it's just a lot of hours, and you got to really want to do that. So I got back into consulting.
That's a huge shift from startup to consulting.
Yeah. It's
Was it a tough choice though? Do you feel quote unquote going backwards in any way? With all respect?
No, I really didn't. I mean, like one thing I've told myself a long time back is I'm not going to have regret.
You just decide that?
I don't have any regrets. I'm like, you make a choice, and if you make a decision, as long as I thought it through, which I did, I'm not going to regret my decision. You can't. I've never been a person that can live. You can't live your life in regret. I just never believed that. So it's just that's me. That's the way I would. So I'm like, I'm going to make a decision. This is why I'm doing this. This is what I was good at. I'm going to go back into that, and I'm going to do that again for a while. Who knows how long that would be? It's like,
go with the wind.
I mean, if you looked at my resume, you'd be like, okay, like all these companies that you work for, they're all bankrupt or defunct or gone, or it's like, it's true. And I've moved around a lot. That's not so unusual today, but back then it was. But it's like I'm going where I'm making a decision to go somewhere for a reason, and if it doesn't work out, doesn't work out. I'll go next. And so, it's yeah. I mean, I've never had an issue kind of like taking on something new. I love that, actually. I love challenge. I love getting into something new. And that's what consulting brought back to me. And that's why I want to get back into it. I was like, I'm going to get back into that mode. And, did that for a while. And then that company went bankrupt. So it had nothing to do with me. But, and I was like, maybe I don't know what. Now I really didn't know what I want to do. So I got out of that for. I just was going to get out of it. I'm not going to do this anymore. Don't know what I want to do. And a friend of mine who had gone to another company after that bankruptcy, he's like, "We're starting a new consulting firm. I need you here." I'm like, "No, man, I'm not doing this anymore." He's like, "No. I need you here. You come in here." I'm like, okay. So,
what changed your mind?
Well, I mean, it was, and I told him, I said, it's going to have to be worth it to me, if you know what I'm saying. And so, it was financially a good deal. And I said, but I'm telling you, I'm doing this on pure mercenary terms. It's just like, I'm coming here because I can make some money and then go do what I want to do. And so this was around 2010. Mm-hmm. And did that, and I learned a lot of lessons there. Because
what is the biggest one?
Because at that point, as I was saying, I'm like, I wasn't really super bought into doing that anymore. I mean, I did it for mercenary reasons, and so I started to like not care about politics of the firm, about how I was perceived, or all these things, and perversely that worked in my favor. It was so odd. It was just counterintuitive in so many ways that like I didn't care. I'm like, I would tell people that worked for me, I'm like, because consulting is a very high turnover business. I mean, 25, almost like 25% every year, people just roll in and out, and so they, I'm like, look. They would ask me questions like that. I'm thinking of leaving. What do you think I should do? I'm like, let me tell you this. You stay here if you're learning something, if you're getting something for you, because the firm is just going to take everything they're going to give them, and so and I kind of got known for that. It's just like, I'm going to give you just unvarnished advice. If you're not learning anything and you think you're stuck, leave. Just leave. Go do something else, because that's not going to help anyone. It's not going to help you. You're not going to be happy. The firm's going to eventually not be happy. So just go do something else. And so it taught me this so much about, like, at some point you just got to be yourself. I mean, like, be you, right? I mean,
you do you.
Exactly. You do you. That's the phrase, right? And I'm like, and I didn't. So the less I cared, like, the more I would get. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, like, I didn't care about being at the company, but the more I thought that way, the more open I was, and the more I would talk about things that I normally probably would never have talked about, and so I'm like, that is a very strange result. And
so you found a different side of you that happened to actually surprisingly welcomed by everybody.
I think that side was always in there, but I was always so cognizant of, like, be the company person, don't rock the boat, all those things. And it was a good lesson to learn. It was very counterintuitive to me. So, I mean, but at the end of the day, I did leave.
Why leave?
Because I said I didn't want to do that anymore. I didn't want to travel. I mean, I was traveling constantly. And at some point, you get older. All I wanted to do was travel at one point when I was younger. Now I was older. I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. It's a grind. It was a grind.
So what do you want? What do you want at that point? You say you don't
Yeah,
want to
so I
travel
didn't
anymore.
really know. And so I quit.
So you quit, have no plan.
I quit and I had no plan.
That's bold.
I
Again,
just left and I was like, I'll figure it out. And, I took, let's call it a sabbatical, for lack of a better term. I took a bunch of time. I did this twice, actually, which, later I did it again. But I just like, what do I want to do? And I went to like, I think my mom used to live in Clearwater, Florida, in Tampa area. And so I just went down there for like 2 months and I just like rented a condo and I just sat by the beach and I'm like, I'm going to figure this out. So I went through it and I'm like, what do I want to do? So that's when I learned a lot about myself in that time. And
what did you learn? The biggest one.
Like, yeah, I was like, how do you figure that out? Like, if you don't know, some people, I always felt like I'm envious of people that always know what they wanted to do. Like, I want to be a doctor. I want to do this. And they just do that for the rest of their life. I'm like, that's cool. I'm like, I don't know what I want to do. I don't know. I don't know. How do I leverage what I know and what I do and what I'm good at? And so I took a couple forays and some other things, and then this didn't work out. So more failures, and I'm like, okay, I got to step back. And so I just gotten married like in 2013, and my wife's like, you can't be like, you've been doing nothing for like a year. Like, what's going on here? So I'm like, yeah, you're right. I mean, you're right. And so I just took it. That was my second sabbatical, if you want to call it that. And I was like, I got to figure this out. And so I stepped back and I decided, what am I good at? Where can I apply what I know? And so it's happened, a good friend of mine, colleague that I had worked with for years and years and years. He had the same experience. So he left the company that we were at. He took a bunch of time off, tried a couple of things that he wanted to do, didn't work out. We were in the exact same spot at the exact same time. And we wound up speaking. And I'm like, I think you and I should talk. We should figure out what we want to do. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, I got some thoughts, and he's like, yeah, I got some thoughts. So we met in like late 2017, right here in Austin, at Bangers as it was, and like, here's what I'm thinking. He's like, I'm thinking the exact same thing. So that is how the company that I now have came about. It was just, how can we leverage what we know and what we've done to make an impact, and where would that be? And so that's how it started.
And before we go there, was that scary? Because you said you're done with consulting. You said you're done with startup world. That's a small project, small at that moment.
Yeah.
Was that decision, was that moment scary? Jumping something that you already said you don't want?
It was. I mean, at the end of the day, though, I started thinking about it. I'm like, I've always been very independent. I don't really like working for other people. I mean, that's the reality of the world. You have to do that for a large degree if you want to like have a life. So, but then I'm like, if I could do what I do and run my own company and be in control of it, because all the other things I've been part of, I was not in control of it. As I said, the people that run it matter. And I'm like, well, what if I'm running it? What if we're running it? We can do it how we want to do it. We can do it the right way. And I'm like, that was the difference for me. I was like, okay, now I'm in control of it. And, could I run a company when I was 20 years before? No. I mean, it was all the experience that I had gained over those times, the failures that I had had, the things that I had learned, the people I met, the places I've gone, the perspective that I had. I'm like, I think this makes sense. I think I can do that. And
does it feel like right time, right people, right moment?
Yeah, it was just a confluence of events, of things, and it was just a good thing. That's how we founded our current company, Sabio Tech Partners.
Tell us more about that.
Yeah, it was so my background's all computer science, all technology. So is my business partners, and we have very complementary capabilities. So so we're like we have a very well-rounded knowledge base, if you will, and so like I think we can do this. We can make an impact somewhere. So where would that be? So we decided to focus on private equity space and in the middle market. So lower down, because there's a lot of private equity companies, a lot of investment firms that don't focus on big transactions. Like that's not where we're going to play. What we thought is, based on the work I had done and what he had done, it's like when these smaller private equity firms are making investments, they're not looking at technology. They're not putting technology into that equation. And so why not? I mean, technology is everything today. And this is 2017, right? This is not like 1995, right? So it's technology is the way a company runs. And so when you're buying a company, you're going to spend multi-millions of dollars to acquire a company. Don't you want to know what's under the hood, essentially? What they're using to run their business. And so that was our mindset, and that's how we approached it. And so we knew some folks in the private equity business, and it took about a year to get any traction. It's a tough nut to crack, as they say. It's a very insular industry, and so it's hard to break into that. But we believed in what we're doing, and we came up with a number of things that we thought were pretty unique in how that was working. And when we started talking about that whole everything that we were doing, it was like people were looking at us like, you do what? You do technology diligence? What is that? I mean, we don't invest in technology companies. No. Oh, we do diligence on everything a company does in terms of technology, everything they use. How are they running their company as it applies to technology? So, it took a little while to get some traction on that. Now, that's much more established thing. So I'd like to think we were at the vanguard of some of that, at least in the middle market and the lower levels. But it took some time, but we believed in what we're doing, and now crazy to say, but the last 2 years of the pandemic, that was our best years, which is strange because we didn't know how that was going to play out, but yeah, it's gone pretty well.
Wow, that's really exciting. Do you feel like you found what you're looking for all along?
Yeah, this is it. This is
Why?
This is exactly it. Because I have this conversation with my wife a lot. It's like, she's like, so I have an office, just down near UT, and I'm there a lot. So she's like, why you're always there? Like, because I love what I'm doing now. I mean, like, I'm in control of what I'm doing, and I really love what we're doing. And part of it is, when you're doing like a diligence, whether that's financial or legal or now technology, it's like a puzzle. I mean, you have to look at a company that you know nothing about. I mean, nothing. There's like, could we'll get a call from a PE firm, and they'll be like, we just went under LOI, letter of intent. Could you do diligence on the technology? Yes. Know nothing about them. Nothing. So like, give us all these documents, and then we'll have like maybe 4 or 5 conversations with them, and we have to give an opinion on what we think.
So what do you do? Tell us the process for folks who are not familiar with this side of the business.
Our bread and butter is technology diligence. So when a PE firm is looking to buy a company, they're going to go through a diligence process, due diligence. A lot of people are familiar with that process, but what does that mean? So I mean, they'll do that financially, they'll do that from a legal perspective, and what we've been saying is, that's two pillars of the stool. You need a third pillar. The third pillar is technology. The stool stands on 3 legs, not 2, right? So, it's taking a look at everything they have in terms of technology and what they're using to run their business.
So what are you looking at? Like system in place?
Yes. So the key component is we need that first question we ask private equity firms, what are you trying to get out of this business that you're buying? Why are you buying it? What are you trying to get? And of course, they want to grow it in some way, but how? So that's called the investment thesis or the value creation agenda. It has a number of different terms, but I'm like, what is your value creation agenda? How are you trying to create value here? That could be various different answers, and like we will gauge everything that we look at as to like in terms of, is it an asset or a liability? So we come up with something that we call a technology balance sheet, or TBS. It's like every piece of technology, we look at like 40, I think it's 50 different areas, maybe shy 48, 50, something around there, in as far as technology goes, and like tell you whether we think it's an asset, which would help you meet your agenda, your value creation objectives, or a liability. And we chose that very specifically because PE firms are all about finance. And so, they look at things in terms of an asset or liability. And so it's like, well, here are your big issues. This is what you need to consider. Like, you want to grow this 5 times over 5 years. Well, these are the systems that are going to be really problematic in that area. Or whatever. I mean, it just depends. And that's what I love about it. It's like,
you don't know.
You don't know what you're going to see. You don't know what you're going to see, but it's like, tell us what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
And we'll tell you what we see in terms of the technology that company uses as far as what you're trying to do.
Can you give us just a small example? Could be like a mega example where, say, maybe this firm, the value creation is, I don't know, synergy with other companies that they already have. And like anything that you can think of so people can see what did you find and the alliance or not so much.
Well, it's interesting because I think when we were starting this, I was talking to a guy from a PE firm. When I said that exact thing, I was like, well, we look at things in terms of assets, liabilities, and we have this presentation view that's just, it's like, you got green bars, you got red bars, and all those 40 categories, 50 categories. And he asked me, well, Brian, these are small companies. Wouldn't everything be red? I mean, like they're probably not going to be that sophisticated in all these areas, infrastructure and cybersecurity, and how do you develop software? How do you integrate stuff? And I was like, well, I could see why you would say that, but no, because the key thing is the driver is, what are you trying to do with this company? So, for example, we worked with a firm that had this is one of our the larger firms that we were doing, but they had, for whatever reason, because there was a number of different acquisitions, they had 3 different ERP systems. So they had, I mean, like, why would you have 3 different ERP systems, like just all over the place? And so I think most people look at that and say, well, don't do that. Just have one. Why would you have 3? Just do one. And so, but because of the way the company came together, and so we looked at that and said, there was another firm that had done some work before them. It's like, yeah, you need to replace all that. Just move to one, like Oracle, or SAP or whatever. And we looked at that and we're like, well, no, you're looking at a 5-year time frame where you're going to hold this company, you're going to buy it and hold the company and sell it again. We can't make a case for you to replace those systems. It just doesn't make any sense because of what you told us you want to do. Now, if you said you were going to hold the company for 20 years, then yeah, you would definitely want to replace that. But so that's just a small example. But there's other companies that have had they want to grow 10 times or whatever, or go into different markets, and you're using spreadsheets to run your sales process. I'm like, that's not going to work. I mean, like, you can't possibly do that. I mean, that's a small example, but almost every time, I can't tell you how many times every company we look at is using small business finance software. I won't use the name of the company, but most people know what it is. But it's like, you can't. That's not going to work. Every PE firm is going to want data. They're going to want information. They're going to want you to be able to produce a lot of information, and you're going to have to replace that. And it's always the case.
So for entrepreneurs who are listening, who are probably feel so intrigued by this conversation because he or she probably never on other side of the table, I'm curious, is there maybe 1 or 2 red flag you can advise entrepreneur to avoid before he or she engages process with an expert like you?
Yeah, that's. I mean, I've thought a lot about that. lately, and I'm going to actually do a talk on that like later in November
That's great.
at a conference here in Austin. But what we've seen repeatedly is smaller companies. I mean, I give them all the credit. They've created a company that's making money, and that's why private equity is looking at them, because they only look at companies that are profitable. That's incredible. I mean, like, more power to you. But they are never prepared for this process. Never. I mean, I don't think we've seen. I mean, we might have seen one or two companies that we've looked at out of like 50 that have been well prepared for the process, and it matters. I think we only get so much opportunity to actually interact with a company that's trying to get themselves sold or looking for investment, because a lot of times going through investment bankers, and investment bankers control that process entirely. So we might get 4 or 5 conversations at best, and the rest is just like, here's the documents we need. So the more documents you send us, the less we have to talk to you, and the more complete that is, it looks better. So that's one part. And then when we do talk to you, like, we don't expect you to have all the answers. I mean, no one can know everything about everything going on in their company. But if you don't know, you don't know. But I mean, be ready for the kind of questions we're going to ask you. Know your technology. Know what you're using. Know how you're running your business. I mean, those are important things, and that impression that you give when we have those conversations is very important, because when we make our report to our private equity firm, that's a big component of it. So most firms, most companies are just not that well prepared for it. So I would say, understand that going forward, you're probably going to have to do a technology diligence when you're looking to sell your company. And that is, just like any diligence, it's a pretty involved process. Just know what you have. Just know what you have. That's it. And just that would be one part, and the other part would be know what you want to do. I mean, like, you're trying to grow a company. We always ask for what we call a roadmap. So what's your roadmap of technology efforts or initiatives or projects that you want to do? Most don't have that. And it doesn't have to be anything elaborate. It's just, well, here's what we're trying to do, and here's what we're going to do to support that technology-wise. And, I can count on one hand how many times we've gotten a roadmap. Even for commercial software companies. It's just like, it kind of boggles my mind, but it's challenging. I mean, it's hard to do. You really have to think in the future about where we are and where we want to be. And at the end of the day, that's essentially what we do. From Sabio is, what do we have now? Where do you want to go? How are you going to get there? That's it. And like, that's what we're trying to analyze. And so just, if the more you think about that, and like, that's what we're going to look at. This is what we're going to analyze. And if you can tell us that in some respect, that's a good thing.
And this is really, really helpful for all the founders on the other side, hoping one day, sooner or later, engage you in the process. So really 3 things. Number 1, the more complex your reporting, all the data you have, the better. Secondly, know exactly where you are, your technology, your systems. Lastly, know where you're going, know how you're going to get there. With that 3 point in mind, he or she will be more prepared when they start the process.
That's exactly right.
With that, Brian, I can tell you are so happy today. I feel like you are truly find the thing that can continuously challenge you, but also give you that opportunity to learn, to grow, to make impact. Are you happy today?
Absolutely.
What is one thing that continue to inspire you or drive you forward?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I always like to be learning, and I always like to be solving problems or investigating and figuring things out, and that's that's what we do. And so, I mean, as I said earlier, when we talked about when I was at KPMG, when they wanted to make me a partner, I didn't get to do a lot of the work. I mean, like, we're growing the company, and I can't do everything about everything, but I mean, like, we made a point to be very engaged in all of our projects. And so I like that. I mean, like, that's what I really like.
You want to be hands-on.
Yeah, but I don't want. But we have other people helping us out, and we've got other folks working with us. And I'm like, I'm not gonna like tread on them, but I'm like, I'm gonna be involved. But it's like at the end of the day, it's like here's all this information, and like, what do you make out of it? What do you see? And I love that because it's just it's like an investigation.
You're like a detector in that big map of information, evidence, find the conclusion.
That's right. Yeah, that's fun. That's a lot of fun. So that's what I love doing.
I think it's so much power, Brian, that I think along the journey, you continuously finding yourself, reinvent yourself. And today, you know who you are, you know what you're good at, you know how you make impact. And with that insight, with that knowledge, truly it's a power. And I can see why you're so happy with who you are, but also finding peace with what you do and how you show up in the world.
Took a while to get there, but yes. You got to go through your ups and downs, and you finally eventually figure it out. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure. I mean, a lot of people you've talked to have that very similar story. So it's very true.
What is one last thing that you want to share with our audiences? He or she may be in the process of finding the thing that drive her or drive him. Maybe he or she in the process of, launching a business. Maybe it's not so quote unquote successful yet. Like, how do you advising them in that process, the journey that you just embarked?
Yeah, I think back like, what would I tell myself when I was younger? And I was like, that's an interesting thought process because, you learn a lot over the years, and I think my number one thing was like, if you're afraid of something, confront that right away. Because I'm like, that was, like I said, that was my mantra for years was
no
fear.
Like, I love that.
What am I afraid of? I mean, like, what am I afraid of? And that would cross many, many areas. But I mean, that being said, you can't just, quit your job and go start a business. I mean, you got to plan that out. It took me years and years and years and years and years to get to that point. But, at the end of the day, I was like, okay, I think you can have fear going into this process, but I mean, like, I believe in what I'm doing. I believe I'm in the right spot. I mean, everything just kind of came together. So, I mean, like, you have to still plan it out. So if you want to start a business, it could take 5 years to get there, but, keep the end goal in mind. It may, you may need to make some money. You may need to prepare your finances, whatever it might be. I mean, like, but you can get there. So I'm not saying just quit and go do what you want to do, but think about what you want to do. And it took me a while to get there, and then plan how you're going to get there. So but I would say just fear is I don't like fear, and I'm not afraid of a lot of things, but I realized over my life that, yes, there was fear holding me back. It holds you back. It's like, whatever that might be, it's like, just confront it. And you may make a decision like, well, that's not for me. Fine. But, for a lot of people, that's not the case. And it wasn't for me. So
I love that. Confront it and move on. You can decide one way or another, but at least you give it a shot.
Confront it, yeah.
And I think the true courage is not someone who have no fear. The true courage is someone like yourself, seeing the fear, confront it, move forward regardless. And that shows courage. And that is help you become the leader you are today, which is brilliant.
Thank you.
So with that, thank you so much, Brian. Oh my God, what an amazing journey. Thank you so much for coming to share the story with each and every one of us. I am so inspired. Thank you and thank you.
I thank you for having me on your show. I mean, it's been great. I'm really looking forward. I looked forward to it, and I'm really happy that I was able to be here.
Of course, honor is all mine. And thank you everybody for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I do, and I cannot wait to see you all next week. Bye, guys.